Hey everyone, I want to welcome you to part 3 of our racial reconciliation conversations. We are hoping and praying that these have been helpful conversations for you. This is the last part of this dialogue. And if you want to access these to watch them again, or if you want to share them with your friends, you can find them all on our YouTube channel just by typing in on YouTube, Living Stones Reno. Thank you, and I love you.
So back to the church, and here's a question. When we talk about racial reconciliation and just diversity. So white evangelicals think sometimes that we have made progress, and we have, when we have some African Americans or other ethnicities attend our church and other minorities that come to our church, and they feel we have a different color. And when they see different color on the platform and they looked at where we are now, they're asking the question, why are we still talking about this? Why is this still an issue? Like we've made some progress, and we don't have to keep dialoguing and talking about this. So why is it important to keep this discussion going? And the perspective of a few here, that should be enough. And we should be satisfied with a little diversity. So why is it important for us to keep this discussion going?
And can I just say, I'm sorry to cut you off, but before Pastor Kyle answers that question, to Ray's point, I'm a proponent of the word some. So I want us to be mindful in this language that we use, because when people hear us as we're in dialogue, the generalizations come out very easily, and they come out unintentionally. So I want to make sure that we're not talking about all white evangelicals and all black people. We need to make sure that, and I apologize for the interruption, but we want to, language is key, and we need to be mindful of the language that we're using.
Thank you for bringing that, to this table and reminding us, because it easily can be generalized, and that's something we do not want to do. So thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. That's actually how I was going to start. I was going to be like, well, as Ray said, I feel like I'm one pastor at one church in Reno, Nevada, which is the second most unchurched place in the United States. It's really hard to represent all of quote unquote white evangelicals. But here's what I think. 1 Peter 5, God says to the pastors, shepherd the flock of God that is among you. So my first responsibility, our responsibility as pastors, is to say, okay, God has given us this flock here at Living Stones. And I think what we've seen at Living Stones over the past few years, initiated by the founding pastor, Pastor Harvey, is he really started pushing us in this area of not being satisfied with anything less than the kingdom of heaven, which is a group of people who are bonded in unity and diversity around the throne of Christ. So I think what the temptation can be is that you start platforming people and say, oh, we're good. And that, maybe, I don't know if I'm using the term wrong, but it's like, that seems just like tokenism, and it's kind of just like using people to kind of put out an image out there. But what God calls us to as a community is a much, much deeper transformation. And he calls us to believe this vision of heaven deep into our bones. And if you value that deep into our bones, you're going to start striving for having diversity at every level of your organization. Now, here's what I've been telling people. We talk about this as pastors. If you look at our pastor board, if you go on our website and look at it, we have a lot of work to do. Because it doesn't represent when I go to Smith's, or it doesn't represent when I go to Walmart. It doesn't represent our community. We have a lot of work to do. And it took me some time to just realize, wow. And so 2 years ago at our pastor retreat, I just said to him, hey, this is one of our core values, but I want to call it an aspirational value. Because if you're a stranger walking in from outside and you come in and you look, you're going to see it on the wall as a value, but then you're going to look at the organization, you'll be like, this doesn't make sense. There's not congruity here. And so we just have declared, as pastors, this is aspirational, and that we're striving for this. And then what we had to do is say, okay, well, now we have to go back to our systems of leadership development, kind of like what Jill says. I think in any organization, the typical thing to promote people into leadership is to just go with who you know. and to use the relationships that you have rather than being intentional about investing into relationships with people you don't know and then figuring out strategic ways to develop them and build them up as God has called us to. When God sent the disciples out to make disciples, they didn't know the disciples they were going to. They had to get in and meet those people and then develop those relationships and raise them up. So I feel like it's an important thing because we need to not just worry about the image, which, by the way, America is consumed and intoxicated with our image, but God is calling us to really believe this kingdom value deep in our bones.
Thank you. That's really good. You had something there?
I was just going to say to Pastor Kyle's point and to organizational structures, like, I don't need to see your mission and your value statement. I need to see your practice, right? So we often have diversity in our mission statement or diversity in our value statement. And then when you look at the thread of practice, we don't believe in it and we don't even name it. So, it's great to have it on paper, but I want to see it in practice.
Yeah. Are you saying practice what you preach? Is it?
That's what I'm saying. Practice what you preach, Pastor Kyle and Pastor Dave.
So I want to shift that to law enforcement. I want to shift it to law enforcement and ask that same question.
It hits home for law enforcement because obviously we want to be representative of our community. We want to have our officers represent our community. And you see what's going on today. Who wants to join a police department? And really the people that we need to institute lasting cultural change are the people that are impacted by what we're doing and how we're negatively impacting our communities. And I don't know how to reach those people and make them realize that they're exactly who we need. That's exactly who we need to become police officers to really, you talk about representing the community and having our leadership representative of our community, and every step forward, we take 3 steps back. And I think law enforcement is in crisis about recruiting.
And I think one thing that we need to acknowledge, like you said, the language we need to push through, is that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And in every one of our organizations, we need to strive for this. But we live in a microwave culture that expects change to happen like that, and it's not. And that's why we need to get downstream and figure out or upstream, I should say, and figure out what are the things that are preventing it from happening, and then let's start attacking that so we can make it happen well. Yeah.
And to your marathon comment, there still needs to be a limit on that marathon.
True.
Because people want,
I agree with
because people want to keep running, right? And so it's like, remember you said it's a marathon, and it's 20 years later. Well, you should have finished by now, right? And
if it takes you 20 years.
Yeah, and so I think that's the reality of it. The other thing I will say is, because I'm about data-driven decisions, and we have rich data, but there's also danger in numbers. Because when we look at our communities of color, we look at percentages and we try to balance out what's happening in a community. So if we look at 2 to 3 to 4% in Black community in Reno, and then we look at an organization and say, well, we've got 2 or 3 people, and technically percentage-wise, it's a matchup. And so we need to be better about talking numbers, and we need to be talking about representation, and we need to be talking about body. And so when we talk about minority communities, and we start, I hear some of our white individuals say things like, I was here and I was a minority and I had this. You had a minority moment because you chose to be there, or you can leave there. I don't stop being Black. So when we start looking at percentages and processes and people, we've got to be mindful that there's danger in those numbers if we don't accurately represent what they are. And we just got work to do. And you don't know what you don't know. And that's why you need different people at the table, again, to shift that narrative.
Yeah.
And with the law enforcement discussion, though, it's a reaching out, just like any other organizational communication point I was making. It's about reaching out, but it's also about coming in. So, the law enforcement agencies reaching out to set up things like the Community Engagement Committee and to set up things like the Citizen Academy, and then also having diverse groups come in and participate and answer that call and say, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to sign up for the Citizen Academy because, and by the way, I just advertised I want to. I told the sheriff last night, and then I told my friend at the FBI and go to yours, and I might join all four, right? But they see for yourself the de-escalation techniques that are being taught right now. And come and actually take that course and be a part of it, and then be a voice for how those are utilized in all aspects of your life. Sit on the community engagement committee. Take advantage of every town hall so that the voice can be heard, and consider entering into the career of law enforcement. It has to be outreach, and it also has to be in reach.
You're right. And then the other thing that is necessary is your community to trust your police department.
Yeah.
And that's where we're falling.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Deputy Chief, I know there's been work around, increasing diversity at the Reno Police Department. Do you feel like there's systemic things in place that prevent that from happening, or the work around that has been kind of pursuing that?
No, we're desperate in that area. I think what it is it's trust. I think it's why would someone who's been negatively impacted by the police want to join that profession? Yeah. But I feel like we're in a hamster wheel, because we say it and we want it and we try to enact measures to recruit that way, and we make very little progress.
But I want to say to that we also have to remember that people are exhausted. Right? It's similar in education. There used to be that thing where I'm going to be a teacher because I had a horrible teacher and I'm going to change some things, right? People used to say that all the time. And then, even our teaching profession lacks racial diversity. It also lacks gender diversity, locally and nationally. And so people are exhausted. I think people are tired of doing the part and sitting on the committees and going to meetings. On the other side of that, I hear what Jill is saying, but I also know that there was a stream of that happening, and things still were happening, right? So we've got to be mindful on both sides. Yes, we want to get more people involved, but when people were involved and things didn't change, they're tired. So, the conversation needs to, let's put it all out there on the table, right? What's working, what's not working, what we're afraid of, what we're fearful of, how people are exhausted, but we're not going to just get done with it by talking. Like, I am tired of talking. And so I, again, like I said, don't need to see your mission and your value statement. I need to see your practice. So when you're getting ready to look at your policy, that's when I want you to call me. I don't want to see the academy. When you're getting ready to change the language in your documentation, that's when I want you to call me, right? And don't show me after you've done it. I want to be in there when you build it. So we've got to restructure even intentionality on how we bring voices to the table.
That's good. That's good. I want to try to help the deputy chief out right now in Reno. Raymond.
This guy right here?
Yeah, Raymond. Would you like to be a police officer?
Come on a ride along with me.
Recruit.
I'll take you personally on a ride along.
Oh man.
Okay. Too old.
I don't know. That academy. What does that academy look like?
You wanted to say something?
I just wanted to add, just even from my perspective, just hearing the conversation about having representation, I think it's, I would think of it right now, even in the season that we're in, if, we have entities, trying to recruit, let's say, black men or members in the black community. I think that, and this is just for me, because if somebody came to me just like we just did now and said, hey, we need representation, do you want to, I think it's a matter of like building relationships and learning what makes me, what fires me up, what drives me, understanding who I am before selecting me and going, I want to mentor you, because all we're doing is we're trying to quickly solve the problem by saying we need representation, but we're not going about it through a process, and we're not going about it with authenticity. And so when you look at the black community and say, well, we look at our entities and we see, man, there's just no representation. I think my opinion, the first step is being intentional about building relationships with the community without even asking to be a part of this, but to sit down, learn who this black community is, who people are, understand what's our interests, what drives people. I think that that's a big part of getting people to not only regain trust in a system that so many people feel is broken, but also to have eventually that representation.
And that's the difference between value and tolerance.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that.
That's actually powerful insight, because we don't look at recruiting that way. We look at recruiting like, look what we have to offer.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to join? So that's good insight.
So I'm staying with you, Deputy Chief. In your honest opinion, how could racially biased law enforcement be prevented?
Small question.
Wow. You sure you want Tiffany to take this one?
You can defer to her.
Well, I mean, it's such a complicated issue, because first of all, our culture might be constructed to be resistant to training or other cultures, or learning about different types of cultures and that kind of thing. But I mean, our fallback has always been training and having people exposure to people of different cultures and learning about different cultures. We train every year. We were going to do a training this year on it, and sometimes the students are hostages. They're not there willingly. And I'm talking about some of our officers. It's because they'd rather be out in the field doing the work. I don't think it's for any other reason than that. I think they just don't like being in a classroom. But we need real institutional, cultural changes in policing. And a lot of times it needs federal oversight to force some of it, to compel it to happen. A lot of agencies need that. For us, I think Ray kind of laid the foundation out, really building community trust, really understanding the needs of the people we want to hire, and then designing an organization and having values that align with those.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Jill, how can we communicate with one another better to build bridges and heal racial wounds?
Man, you're just sucking us.
I know.
We're talking about race and reconciliation.
God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and we need to do a better job of using those in proportion. Right now, and Ray and I were talking right before we started, that everything is so heightened right now. Everyone's yelling. It's hard to hear over shouting. And so what's needed to heal is to really listen. And that takes time. It takes gut-wrenching humility. It takes the ability to self-examine and to reflect and to notice and to pay attention and to put on another set of lenses that you haven't been looking through before. It takes empathy, and on a cognitive level, where we can put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, and on an emotional level where we can let ourselves feel the pain that's being felt today. And it takes, like all things that we talk about in the church, it often takes repentance to acknowledge, to confess, to own, and then it takes evangelism to share with others the insights that we have in that process and in that journey. And it takes grace and patience to recognize that we're not gonna get it right the first time or the second time with each other, but we're gonna stay actively engaged and not disengage, because that's the only thing that actually makes real change over time. And this is an issue that is spiritual. It's an issue in the heart, And it's also an issue in the broader context of policy and systems and data and the way we do things.
Yes. You know, I just want to thank you for just even restating, you know, how this is such an important time for people to listen. You know, yes, we do have our opinions. Yes, we do have, you know, our thoughts on, you know, what we see and what's happening. But I think, you know, a greater call for all of us, especially in the body of Christ, where there's something that's pushing up against me, maybe that I disagree with, or something that, you know, again, I'm not aligned with. It's not a time to push forth my voice, but it is a time just right now to humble myself and listen. So I can, like you said, I can get another pair of eyes, you know, maybe what I have not been seeing. And I think that's what's going to take right now in our culture, all around the board, you know, again, that I think many people need to find themselves at that place where I'm just trying to learn about my brother. I'm just trying to learn about my friend. I'm just trying to learn about my coworker who's different than I, you know, rather than having opinions that I'm pushing on them. And, you know, seeing that person, getting to hear from that person and learn about them, you know. And I think if we can step into that realm, you know, we're going to have a lot of healing. We're going to have a lot of trust. I think we're going to have a lot of people, you know, having a genuine care for one another when we just listen, and I'm not so quick to just give you what I think. And so thank you again for sharing that, as far as, you know, it's going to take people listening at this time because none of us can see it all and know it all and be perfect in it all. And it's going to take a collaborative group of people, voices, people at the table together, speaking into this and having a shared knowledge, a shared understanding with a common goal. And I think that moves us all in the same direction. And that's what we want. We want to be all going in the same direction. And that's going to take, you know, hearing and understanding one another and sharing that common goal. Because if we can't have a common goal, we're not going to be going in the same direction.
And can I just say, Pastor, the power in dialogue is the fact that not everyone around the table has the same viewpoint. And I'm not disagreeing with both you and Jill said, but I would be remiss to sit at a table in a conversation and we do not honor and acknowledge historical mistrust and distrust. And I hear you. I hear you loud and clear where we all want to get and where we all want to be and be in this dialogue. But we also, if we were to do a Wordle right now of what word did Tiffany say the most? Exhausted. I've said it like over and over again. I'm exhausted. People are exhausted. And people are shouting because they're angry. And let's be clear. What's happening now is not new. It's public. Right. So people are not shouting new things. They've been shouting for some time. So the question is not, or the conversation not, is just to listen. My question is, are you listening? Did you hear them the first time, or the second time, or the third time, or the fourth time? So I want to be clear that I'm not opposed to conversation. I'm not opposed to dialogue. I'm not opposed to us being in this space. But we also have to recognize people are not shouting new things. People are not shouting new pain. People are not shouting new fear. People are not shouting new anger. People are shouting because they're tired of talking and not being heard. So if you're going to hear me, you can't go, oh, wow, now it's time to listen. I needed you to listen when my mother was shouting, when my father was shouting, when my grandmother was shouting, when my great-grandmother was shouting, when my great-grandfather was shouting. Did you hear them? And that's the challenge. That's the discomfort that we really need to lean into.
And it's listen and do. And if I can share personally, 2 times where that hit me in my role in the legislature. One was when the Equal Rights Amendment came up. And I had a beautiful dialogue with a senator in another house on another side of the aisle from a different background and community, Senator Pat Spearman, who I consider a good friend, who I adore, who, when I asked her about, I'm hearing that it might mean this and it might do that and it might do this, and she spent 30 minutes patiently talking through with me and answering the questions that I had that had arisen around that amendment. And then at one point she just said, every time we want to push forward equal rights, there will always be an excuse or a reason not to support it. Just listen to the slave owners and the segregationists. And it was like in that parking lot at the legislature where real dialogue happens, a line in the sand was drawn, and I knew which side I wanted to be on. But I will tell you that vote, twice now, has been the single most contentious vote that I have received the most abuse about, the most pushback about, and I'm okay with it, because I know that there are others that have received far more as a result, and it's the right stand to make, to say that every single citizen has equal rights under the law. And then another vote that was also extremely difficult was on felon voting rights. And I only saw it from one perspective. I only saw it from, well, what are other states doing, and what, and then somebody pointed out, what does the Constitution say about voting rights? And I looked at the US Constitution, and then I said, well, why do we have these restrictions? And then I looked at the history, and I spent 8 hours in my pajamas on a Saturday in the middle of the legislative session, appalled as I read the history. And in the early 1900s, where we have it written out that this was meant to be to suppress the black voice and the vote, and it's called the civil death. And I suddenly listened, and I saw, and I changed. And I changed the way that I voted because I saw it in a different context that I had never seen it before. So it can't just be listening. It has to be listening with change. So I hear you.
Thank you. I think that is so profound to where we all need to be drawing a line in the sand of what we're going to be committing our lives to, what are we going to be committing the core values of why we exist to, and taking a stand for those things that may cost us, friends, may cost many different allies, or cost just at the risk of losing a lot. And I think this is an issue that you have to draw a line in the sand of where you're going to stand, and the way you're going to go forward around race and racial reconciliation. So I was informed that, of course, we only have a few minutes left. And so I want you to do this. I want you to summarize your quick, brief, last, comments that you want to have. I didn't get a chance to ask you, why do you think people maybe possibly fear you as a black man? If you want to have that in your last words, it's up to you. But I want to just, again, with time left, I just want to just hear you give a quick summary of what you would like us to leave here with today from this panel.
I would say that let's be reminded that everybody has a kind of place and a purpose. Some people will protest, some people will march, some people will write policy, some people will run for office, but don't try to single us into one siloed piece of identity. And so know me, Tiffany, as a black woman, and then understand a community of people that I come from.
We're just going down the line. I feel overwhelmed by this whole season, and even by this conversation. I feel very encouraged, but it's like, man, there's just so much work to do everywhere. Like the exhaustion, I think, I don't get it to the same degree that you get it, but I feel overwhelmed because I'm like, how do we do this? Where do we start? And one thing that I was praying yesterday, and God just reminded me, like, you guys can spin your wheels. You said the word hamster. Like, you can spin your wheels all you want in your flesh, but real change isn't going to happen without my Spirit. And so I'm thankful that God has made all people, regardless of their religious belief, in His image, and we can do a lot as image bearers of God, which is great. But I really firmly believe that we need a movement of God's Spirit to see real change. And so I rest in that. And so I rest in the fact that we're going to try to do everything we can to move forward. But at the end of the day, it's not by might nor by power, but by the Spirit, says the Lord. And so that's what I'm hoping that we can just all hold on to and learn from this conversation a little bit.
I want to express gratitude, appreciation to you all. The first time I met you, Ray, and it was enlightening and eye-opening for me, and the work you do on me and the friendship you give to me has I think, evolved me as a human being over the years, and I hope you continue to do that for me. And I'll take what the feelings I got from today and try to impart those on the department and try to set it on the right course.
Thank you, Deputy Chief.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate being a part of this panel and just allowing my voice to be heard and my perspective. My hope is that, as we move through this, that these are the conversations that are always at the table, that are hard, and I think it's important for us to listen, to have grace, and but with the intention of action, right? So let's not let this conversation be the conversation and we go back and everything stays the same. My hope is that this is the conversation from now until forever, until we have that change. So, yeah.
I just want to come back to shalom. How can each and every single one of us be blessed are the peacemakers? And that doesn't mean that we gloss over. It doesn't mean that we slide aside. It doesn't mean that we just have a false peace. It means that we have uncomfortable conversations, crucial conversations, and that we don't just stay in listening, but we move on to action. But I want to constantly encourage each of us and come back to myself. How in every single moment can I be an ambassador of peace and an ambassador of the way things ought to be? And what influence can I have toward that goal and to His glory?
Yes. Well, thank you. I just want to say thank you all for this panel, taking your time to dialogue and have conversation and think through what we're going through in our climate and in our world. It's very important. And I just want to say to you who have tuned in today, it's complex, it's hard. You hear about the brokenness of our world, of our communities, of our families, people we know, people who have experienced just harsh persecution, and just so many different things. And you're probably wondering, well, what did this dialogue and conversation here today accomplish? Well, we're around the table. We are listening and hearing one another. We are getting a deeper understanding. And I think I'll add another word today just by what we've been talking about, with the intent of action. And that's our prayer that is for you. To Livingstone's Church, this is a season that we're entering into. What role are we going to play in the brokenness of this world as we talk about racial reconciliation? And I just don't want to leave you with all of this brokenness, but our hope is Jesus Christ. Our hope is the gospel. The good news that it is hard, it is broken, and sin has devastated this world, broken our families, and broken down all the systems and organizational structures that we have. But Christ is our hope, and the Bible lets us know that in Him, He made one new man, and that we are all one in Him who trust in Him. And so we have the hope of the gospel. So don't leave this conversation. Yeah, you might be saying nothing was fixed. But again, we talked about our win today, and I pray that you would enter into that you would draw a line in the sand, that you're giving your life to this, and that you're going to stand on the side of pursuing racial reconciliation, and that is the hope of the gospel. And so thank you. Until next time, we pray that something was said here today that would encourage you to pursue this with us and be on the journey with us. Thank you, and see you next time.